I can't stop kissing my brother. The collar of my dress shirt strangled me as I sat before the hiring panel. I needed this job desperately, but damn, if interviews didn't always make me feel like I was one wrong word away from hurling all over. To make matters worse, I'd gotten the invite mail from a sketchy job site I didn't even remember signing up for. Deep breaths, Ethan. You got this. I forced what I hoped was a confident smile and felt the air whoosh out of my lungs in shock. Sitting at the head of the table with a wide grin was none other than Nate. Nate freaking Carrington. My ex-stepbrother. Bane of my existence. Well, shit. Nate, of course, looked annoyingly perfect, like he just rolled out of some model's bed and into this power suit. Meanwhile, I was sweating through my nice button-down. Memories of stolen baseball cards and purple nurples flooding my brain like some kind of PTSD montage. We barely lived together all 4 years of our siblingship, but it had managed to be the longest years of my life. "Ethan Powell," he drawled, cocking his head to the side. "This is unexpected." His tone, the way he said my name, caused my skin to itch right along with his glinting hazel eyes. Almost 10 goddamn years since I'd seen Nate Carrington in the flesh, and all the old resentment came rushing back like it was yesterday. "I could say the same," I said, my voice coming out strangled. "What are you doing here?" What a stupid question. A slow smile spread across Nate's unfairly chiseled face. "I work here, Ethan. In fact, I own the place." I stared at him, my brain stuttering to catch up. Last I heard, Nate was abroad and his father had every plan for him to settle down there. But there he was, Nate, interviewing me for a job. Oh, hell no. I stood up so fast my chair almost went over, my flight instinct kicking into overdrive. "You know what? I just remembered I have a thing. I have to go." I was halfway to the door when Nate's voice cut through my panic. "Not so fast, pal." I turned back slowly. Nate was still lounging in his chair, but his eyes had gone sharp and calculating. "I think you should stay. In fact," he paused and looked at me in a way that left me feeling small and exposed, like a bug under a lens. "I insist." I glared at him, shocked. Was he really trying to force me into working for him? He really hadn't changed in the slightest. "Why?" I asked, despising how my voice came out small and confused. Nate's smile was all teeth, predatory. "Maybe I'm curious. Maybe I want to see what little Ethan is made of these days," he shrugged, all casual. My jaw tightened, fists clenching hard at my sides. That old anger sparked inside me, both inviting and dangerous. It would be so easy to tell Nate exactly what I thought of his little power play, to storm out of here in a blaze of self-righteous fury. But damn it, I needed this job. I couldn't let him win. I took a deep breath, squared my shoulders, and met his gaze head on. "Fine," I bit out, hating the way his eyes gleamed with satisfaction. "When do I start?" Nate grinned. "Oh, we already started." He reached for his phone, glancing at my file, and tapped a rapid-fire message. Within seconds, my cell phone vibrated with an incoming message. "First assignment, trip to Italy." "Pack your bags, Ethan. We leave for Italy tomorrow." I couldn't believe it. Italy? What on earth does that have to do with anything? Nate unfolded himself from his chair, unbuttoning his suit jacket in smooth motions. "I suppose you'll see. Welcome to Carrington Enterprises. I have the feeling this is going to be interesting." And then he was gone, leaving me and the other hiring manager slack-jawed in the middle of the conference room. What the actual hell? The next day. The first thing that hit me as I stepped off Nate's private jet was the overwhelming assault of the senses that was Italy. The air smelled of leather and wine, of freshly cut grass. It looked like something off a freaking postcard, perfect, almost too perfect to be real. Kind of like Nate himself, who at the moment was striding down the jet steps behind me, the soles of his stupidly expensive loafers crunching on the tarmac. I still couldn't get my head around any of this. 24 hours ago, my biggest concern had been whether I'd ironed my lucky interview shirt. Spoiler alert, I had not. And now here I was, following after my teenage nemesis turned boss, like some kind of lost puppy. Nate seemed unbothered. He moved like he owned the world, which, I suppose, he kind of did. I'd Googled him on the plane, thanks to the in-flight Wi-Fi. It didn't take long to discover that the bully I spent 4 years of my teenage years with had turned into a business wonderkind. Under his guidance, his father's already wildly successful company was expanding into a multi-billion-dollar global empire. And here we were together for some reason. To be honest, my life prior to this wasn't that bad. Not long after the divorce from Nate's father, my mother had been quick to jump into another marriage. I was used to it. She loved the thrill of being married to men who couldn't even value a dollar bill. Nate's father was a shock compared to the rest of her men, and I didn't mind him at first until... "Keep up, Ethan," Nate called over his shoulder, not bothering to check if I was following as he slid into the back seat of a sleek black car. I gritted my teeth and climbed in after him, the rich leather seats cradling my jet-lagged bones. At least, there were some perks to being Nate Carrington's... what was I, exactly? Personal assistant? Verbal punching bag? Despite all this, my mind couldn't help replaying the one time on the jet when our arms had touched, and Nate had smiled at me like a human being, and not like the Satan he is in a $5,000 suit. God, I was pathetic. "Seatbelt," Nate said without looking up from his phone, the tone brooking no argument. I briefly considered not doing anything, but knowing Nate, he'd slam on the brakes and send me face-planting into the seat back in front of me, just to be a jerk. I put my seatbelt on, the clink of the metal clasp loud in the plush interior. Outside, the Italian countryside whizzed by in a pretty blur, but I couldn't focus on any of it. My entire being was laser-focused on the man beside me. It was almost overwhelming, being this close to him after so many years. But beneath that was something else too. A low hum of awareness? Excitement? The physical changes were obvious, the broadened shoulders straining his suit jacket, the 5 o'clock shadow dusting the hard line of his jaw, but his eyes were different too. There was a wariness there, like he was sizing me up, trying to figure out if I was friend or foe. I almost laughed at the thought, as if there had ever been any question about which side of that line we fell on. Nate and I weren't friends. We weren't even really family, not anymore. We were just two people with a whole load of baggage between us, thrown together by the whims of fate and Nate's frankly inconvenient hiring practices. And now we were stuck with each other in a foreign country for God knows how long. What could possibly go wrong? 3 days later, our first days in Italy were a blur of business meetings and power lunches. It seemed the life of a CEO's personal assistant mainly involved a lot of fetching coffee and trying not to fall asleep during boardroom presentations. Far from glamorous. But on the third day, something changed. One afternoon, Nate surprised me completely by scratching meetings altogether in favor of what he referred to as a mental health day. I eyed him a little skeptically, and he just smiled broadly, hurling a black helmet at me. "Ever ridden on a Vespa, Ethan?" Reflexively, I caught the helmet, the plastic cool against my fingers. "Can't say that I have. Why?" Nate's grin broadened. "There's a first time for everything." And then I found myself hugging the back of Nate's motorcycle as he whizzed through the winding streets of Tuscany. The wind whipped through my hair, and the scent of oranges and olive groves filled my nose. It was terrifying, exhilarating. Nate took the hairpin turns at breakneck speed, his body warm and solid against mine, and I found myself laughing, my cheek pressed against the soft leather of his jacket. And for a moment, I let myself free. I let myself just be. Here, with someone. With him. Of course, it couldn't last. Our ride ended soon enough in front of a tiny trattoria nestled along the hillsides. The patio was draped in bougainvillea, and the air was heavy with smells of garlic and red wine. Nate ordered for us in flawless Italian, and the waiter fell all over himself to please the rich American. I watched it all with this strange mix of fascination and unease rolling in my gut. It wasn't that I hated Nate's success, it was just jarring, seeing him like this, in his element. Nate had always been the golden boy, but now he was untouchable. Our eyes met, his lips lifted at the corners, and I was abruptly reminded that Nate, for all his polish and charm, was still just Nate. The boy who'd stuck gum in my hair and then told the entire 9th grade I peed my pants. This continued until 11th grade when the divorce finally happened. My arch nemesis, my personal tormentor. What? What were we now? "You're pretty quiet," Nate noted, swirling his wine glass languidly. "Overwhelmed by the devastating brilliance of my wit and charm?" I snorted. "Hardly." Nate grinned. "Pity. I rather thought we were having a moment." I rolled my eyes pointedly, disregarding the traitorous little flutter in my chest. A momentary lapse in judgment, maybe. I speared the ravioli with my fork. "Don't let it go to your head." Nate clutched his chest in mock offense. "You wound me, Ethan. And here I was trying to romance you with carbs and ancient architecture." I almost choked on my pasta. "Romance me?" Nate's eyes sparkled with an emotion I couldn't define. Figure of speech, she replied lightly, yet he kept his eyes on mine a shade too long. I was the one who broke eye contact first, my cheeks warm. Pull yourself together, Ethan. We ate in silence, the easy banter from earlier gone like the morning dew. By the time we mounted the Vespa again, I couldn't shake that one word, romance. That had to be a joke, right? Nate romancing me? No way. 1 week later. The rest of the trip passed in a blur of confusing signals and charged silences. One moment, Nate would be all business, barking orders and looking up from his laptop. A second later, he'd pull me off to some dark alcove so we could take selfies together, his arm around my shoulders, his breath hot on the back of my neck. It was screwing with my head, big time. I tried to visit the site that had sent me the job invite for this darn job, but it was down, a constant 404 error. The very thought of applying to new jobs drained and scared me all at once. On our final night in Italy, my phone dinged with a mail from Nate. Nightcap, my suite in 5, I'll leave the door open. I should have declined. My inner voice was screaming this was a very bad idea, but I was curious and maybe, just maybe, a little bit tempted. What could I say? I never claimed to be very smart. Nate's suite was bigger than my entire apartment back at home. I couldn't even call that place home. It was just a space to sleep and exist. It was lonely. Sorry, I didn't have time to get dressed. I hope you don't mind. I spun around at Nate's voice, and the prospect that I walked in on him naked sent a tiny thrill through me. It's fine. Sadly, Nate looked decent enough. At least the more important parts were well covered by a white towel. Nate fixed us both a drink, his fingers brushing mine as he handed me the crystal tumbler. Scotch. Figured Nate would have expensive taste in booze, too. We stood on the balcony in silence for a long moment, the warm night air kissing our skin. I could feel Nate's eyes on me, but I kept my gaze fixed on the starry sky. Beautiful, isn't it? Nate murmured. I swallowed hard, suddenly feeling hot. Yeah, it is. Nate shifted closer, his shoulder brushing mine. I'm glad you came, Ethan. I know this trip wasn't exactly conventional. I laughed, short and sharp. That's one word for it. Nate turned to face me, his expression uncharacteristically serious. Also, it's coming late, but I'm sorry for your loss. Thank you. I never understood why condolences were exchanged for a thank you. It seemed morbid. Nate took a sip of his drink before continuing. You know, you don't have to be alone, right? My heart stuttered in my chest. The way he was looking at me, it was intense, raw, like he was seeing me, really seeing me. I never admitted it to anybody, but despite my strained relationship with my mother and the sea of stepfathers and step-siblings, she was my only family. I spent a good part of my college years looking after her when she got sick. Cancer was a time sucker. None of her husbands were there at that moment, just me. In my early 20s, no friends, no relationships, no social life whatsoever. Losing her after all that sent me adrift, floating from job to job, alone, and now I was here with Nate, unsure of how to feel or what to say. Nate, why? What do you mean by why? I've always tried to be there for you. You're not the most receptive, but I always kept pushing. He threw his head back in a throaty laugh that carried on in the night wind. Remember when I had to steal your baseball cards just to get you to come to my birthday party? I did remember. Not in that sense, though. I remembered Nate being a total ass, stealing my baseball cards, and me having to track him down to a no-name nightclub to get it back, only to get the stupid excuse that he didn't know where he placed them. He was the king of all ass hats. With a gentle tilt of my glass, the amber burn of the scotch flowed down my throat. I got so mad at you that night. I know, right? Nate collected my empty glass and swished it with his. You got so drunk out of anger, my father was livid when we got home. Truly, Mr. Carrington was a blaze of fury that night, but not towards Nate, to me, the drunk idiot. His voice rang in my head. Of course you're a drunk. What else would I have expected from the child of a maid? The memory washed over me like a flood of ice water. What was I thinking? Decisively, I thrust the glass against Nate's chest. Thanks for the drink. I have to go now. Nate's eyes widened and his palm wrapped around my wrist in a tight grip. What's wrong? I thought we were having a good time. Some things never change. Nate always had fun while I had to get punished after. Even now, my stupid heart was doing the darn flutters that he's calling it a good time. Let go of me, I yanked my hand out of his hold. This is wrong. For the love of God, stop being so stuck up, Ethan. Forget what's right or wrong. What do you want? I flinched at his emphasis on you. Who cared what I wanted? I'd lived my entire life according to the wants of my mother and her numerous life partners. When I finally spoke, it came out as a choked whisper. I don't know what I want. The moment those words came out of my lips, I knew it was a lie. I knew exactly what I wanted. Had known for a while now, if I was being honest with myself. I wanted him. God help me, I wanted Nate Carrington. Shit, don't cry. Nate lifted a hand, his fingers grazing my cheek. I closed my eyes, leaning into his touch as tears spilt down my cheeks. His fingers followed the path of my tears, as if enchanted, down my cheeks, below my chin, and over my Adam's apple as I swallowed hard. Open your eyes and look at me, Nate demanded suddenly, and my eyes flew open to meet his. Ethan, tell me to stop. I shivered, leaning into his touch despite myself. Tell me you don't feel this thing between us. Nate's voice was rough, almost pleading. I closed my eyes again, my pulse pounding in my ears. I could lie, I could push him away, go back to hating him like I was supposed to, as I forced myself to from the moment my mother introduced him to me as the son of her new fiancé. It would be easy, right? Safe. But I was so tired of playing it safe. I feel it, I whispered. Nate, I feel it so much, it scares me. Then his mouth was on mine, hot and demanding, and I was drowning in him, my hands fisting in his hair, my heart slamming against my own. It was electric, it was terrifying, it was everything. I'd never wanted anyone the way I wanted Nate at that moment, never needed anyone so badly, it felt like I'd die if I didn't have him. But as Nate's lips trailed fire down my throat, one thought crystallized in my mind with startling clarity. I was in trouble. Oh, I was in so much trouble. Because this wasn't just sex. This was a beginning, and I wasn't at all sure I was ready for what came next. The next morning. I woke up the next morning with a pounding headache and an overwhelming sense of self-hate. What scrap of sanity had made me think sleeping with Nate Carrington was a good idea? I'd slept with Nate. I'd slept with my stepbrother. The same brother who was conspicuously absent from the tangled sheets beside me. My heart sank. I called out his name. Nate? He was gone. Of course. What had I expected? Cuddles and room service? This was Nate freaking Carrington. He'd gotten what he wanted from me. The fact that I'd wanted it just as badly was beside the point. I'd known better. I really had. But Nate had a way of getting under my skin. Every pun intended. Nope, not going there. I was already in way too deep. The last thing I needed was a recap of the X-rated reel playing on a loop in my brain. I needed to focus on damage control, on pretending last night never happened. I mean, it's not like Nate was going to bring it up. He'd made it pretty clear where we stood by ducking out before I even woke up. Message received, loud and clear. Right now, I needed a shower, a gallon of coffee, and a time machine. I couldn't afford to dwell on this, couldn't afford to feel anything at all. Because if I let myself feel even a fraction of the longing and desperation clawing at my chest, I was pretty sure I'd fall apart completely, and I refused to give Nate Carrington the satisfaction of breaking me. Not again. 3 days later. The flight back home was excruciating in its awkwardness. Gone were the easy banter and charged looks of the past 2 weeks. In its place was a stony silence and enough tension to power a small city. I could feel Nate watching me when he thought I wasn't looking. His gaze heavy on the side of my face, but every time I glanced his way, he'd be engrossed with something else. It made me want to scream, or cry, or maybe just shake him until he acknowledged what had happened between us. What kept happening despite our best efforts to pretend otherwise. Nate's first order immediately after we returned was my transfer to the marketing department. If he thought I was going to complain, he was dead wrong. I was used to this not being a priority. I only had myself, and once again, Nate had managed to remind me that. I threw myself into my new position in marketing with a single-minded focus bordering on obsession. Starting as an intern was draining, but I thought if I kept myself busy enough, I could almost pretend Italy had never happened. Almost. Still, every night I'd lie awake replaying each moment in excruciating detail. The taste of vintage scotch on Nate's tongue as he kissed me, the sheer terrifying want in his eyes as he looked at me, like I was something precious, something important, like I mattered. God, I was pathetic. I really needed to get a grip, a life, a clue, but I didn't know how to quit Nate Carrington. Didn't know if I wanted to try. Which is why when Nate's father started showing up at the office, all clenched jaw and disapproving glares, I told myself it didn't matter. until he came to me. He stood above my desk, a vision of Nate in 30 years. "Did your mother send you here?" The immediate dread in my gut at his voice wasn't a product of my overactive imagination. It was from 4 years of strict torture and plain hatred for this man. Wasn't he aware of my mother's passing? Why would he even think she sent me here? I cleared my throat and muttered, keeping my eyes on a stack of documents. "My mother passed away a few months ago, sir." "Oh, okay." And without missing a beat, he walked out of the marketing department. Mr. Palmer, his secretary, smiled apologetically. "I'm sorry for your loss, Ethan. It's nice to see you again." With that, he simpered after Mr. Carrington. What the hell was wrong with these people? He was married to her for 4 damn years. 3 days later. I was done with Nate's bullshit. Maybe if he had kept his hands off my body in Italy, I wouldn't have cared if he avoided me like the plague. But now that my brain had decided to torture me by replaying different versions of that night, we needed to talk. Maybe if he rejected me straight up, I'd nurse my wounds into hatred. I stormed straight from the elevator to his office, my head pounding with extreme sleep deprivation, ignoring the protest of his new secretary, a busty blonde with red-ass lipstick. I barged into his office. If Nate heard the commotion, he didn't show it. All I could see was the back of his chair and the polished leather of his expensive shoes from the side. "Nate, we need to talk." I slammed the door harshly, twisting it closed with a loud click. Was the sex that bad? It was a stupid question. I crossed my arms, waiting for him to at least turn around and acknowledge me, but he didn't even twitch. Anger swelled in my chest. "Nate Carrington, look me in the eye." The chair swiveled towards me and I froze. The face in front of me wasn't Nate's. It was his father. Robert Carrington's gray eyes were stormy and his hands linked ominously over the huge mahogany desk. "It has come to my attention," he began, each word dripping with contained disdain, "that once again you've become something of a distraction for my son. So I came to confirm it." What did he mean by once again? And for his information, I was the one getting distracted. My blood turned to ice in my veins. I'd literally given him the confirmation on a platter of gold, and from the looks of it, he was not pleased. I opened my mouth to say something, anything, but my tongue felt like sandpaper. Robert's lip curled in a sneer, his gaze raking over me like I was something unpleasant he'd found on the bottom of his wingtips. "I'll make this simple, Ethan," but his tone suggested it was anything but. "Whatever you have with Nathan ends now. I won't have him make the same mistake I made with your type." I frowned, clenching my hands into tight fists. "Don't refer to my mother or me like that. Your mother was a secretary who climbed into her boss's bed regularly and coerced him into marriage with a pregnancy scare." This was new information, and boy, it slammed into me with a bang. My mother wouldn't do something like that. That was a lie. I knew she could. This totally explained why a man like Robert Carrington had gotten married to my mother. But in her defense, all he had to do was not sleep with his damn secretary. "Believe what you want, boy. I don't know how you even got hired, but I want you to quit." His eyes narrowed, cold and assessing. "Nate is my heir, and he won't be risking it all on a piece of low-level office trash. Do I make myself clear?" I wanted to scream at him, to tell him he had no right, no say in what Nate and I did or didn't do, to tell him that my mother's actions had nothing to do with me. But all that came out was a strangled and ashamed, "Yes, sir." My face burned with humiliation, with shame, with the sickening realization that maybe, in some small secret part of myself, I believed him. Robert dismissed me with a curt nod, his point made, and as I stumbled back to my desk, as I walked away, all I could see was Nate's face. The way he'd looked at me in Italy like I was his whole world. The way he'd held me, touched me, whispered my name like a prayer. The way he made me feel seen, understood, wanted. My brain honestly wasn't equipped to deal with all these emotions. Hating Nate Carrington was the only way to survive being around him, and now, that was totally impossible. So I did the only thing I could think of. What Robert ordered. I quit. 1 week later. The next week was a blur. Nate had sent me millions of texts, trying multiple approaches. He went soft, pleading in voice notes for me to talk to him. He went hard, threatening to show up at my place. Then he compromised, begging for us to meet anywhere. Nate Carrington never begged. He demanded. He cajoled. He strategized. Begging wasn't exactly his style. Him doing it for me made my mind wander. Could it be that he liked me? No way. I stared blankly at my apartment wall, counting the seconds along with the ticking of the clock. A sharp knock jolted me out of my wallowing, once, twice, 3 times, each one more insistent than the last. I briefly considered ignoring it, but something in my gut whispered that I already knew who it was. It couldn't be anybody else, really. I turned the knob before the person on the other side pushed their way inside. The tiny voice of hope in my head was right. It was Nate. But he looked wild, desperate, like a man on the edge. Good, that made 2 of us. What do you want? I bit out, going for nonchalant even as my pulse kickboxed my ribcage. Nate paused, raking a hand through his blonde curls. You? What? How could he say it so easily? My eyebrows threatened to climb right off my forehead. Could have fooled me, I scoffed, crossing my arms in front of my chest like a shield. Weren't you pretending I didn't exist? Nate flinched, a muscle in his jaw jumping. I know, he said, his voice rough. I know I fucked up, Ethan. I shouldn't have. After Italy, I shouldn't have just... Abandoned me? I supplied helpfully, ignoring the way my heart clenched at the memory. Tossed me aside like yesterday's garbage, treating me like some dirty little secret you couldn't wait to. I was trying to protect you, Nate's eyes blazed, his hand clenching into fists at his side. My father, he called that morning. He found out I hired you, threatened to ruin you if I didn't put an end to it. Ruin what? There was nothing to ruin. I stared at him, uncomprehending. So you decided that ending it meant icing me out completely, cutting me off without so much as a heads up? I shook my head, a bitter laugh clawing its way up my throat. Nate exhaled sharply, dragging a hand down his face. I know, he said again, quieter now, defeated. I thought I was trying to give him time to cool down, a distraction even. I swallowed hard, my throat suddenly tight. I didn't need you to do anything, I said, my voice embarrassingly tiny. I just wanted you to talk to me, to stop making me feel like a confused fool, to trust me. Nate's eyes met mine, stormy and sincere. I do trust you. I trust you more than I ever trusted anyone. It's just, my whole life, my father, Nate shook his head, his lips twisting wryly. Let's just say his love has always been conditional, performative, and I guess I thought, I don't know, that I could protect you from that, from him. I softened just a little and took a step closer. Growing up the way I did hardened me. I don't need protecting. Nate huffed out a laugh. That's the problem, believe me, I know, he hesitated, then reached out, his fingers grazing my jaw. That doesn't mean I don't want to try to protect you, to take care of you, even if I royally suck at it sometimes. I leaned into his touch despite myself, my eyelids fluttering shut. Why? I croaked, daring to hope. Why do you even care, Nate? I'm nobody. I'm just me. That sad kid who sucked royally at communication. Nate growled low in his throat. The next thing I knew, his hand was fisted in my shirt, yanking me forward until our chests collided over the door line. Don't, he snarled, his eyes flashing. Don't you ever say that, Ethan. You're not nobody. God, you're everything. My heart stuttered, and then started spinning double time. What are you saying? Nate's grip gentled, his thumb skating over my pulse point. I'm saying I love you, he murmured, his gaze searing into mine. I'm so fucking in love with you, I can't see straight. Have been since high school. I shook my head and tried to process, to make sense of what he was saying as I pulled away. So what, you bullied me instead? Nate looked pained, reached for me, and then seemed to think better of it. Instead, he shoved his hands in his pockets. I was a stupid kid. I liked you from the very first day I saw you, but in less than 5 minutes you became the son of my father's new girlfriend. The feeling was pretty mutual. Nate was still outside my door, right on the other side of the line. One step would ruin the balance. Look, I'm tired of pushing you away, Nate confessed, and it was like the whole world stopped, like everything narrowed down to this moment, this man. I took a step back into my apartment as if connected by an invisible thread. He followed, stepping over the line at the doorway. What about your father? That was the entire point of the Italy trip. Nate nudged his leg back, closing my door with a kick. Took a while to be finalized, but you're looking at Carrington's largest shareholder. To hell with my father. It all made sense. No wonder he had time to frolic around like it was a honeymoon. Hey! No wonder it felt so weird. We were on a freaking honeymoon trip. You're a sneaky man, Nathan. He shrugged, closing the distance between us. I came back to the U.S. just for you, and I'll be damned if I can't even get you to stay at Carrington just because of my father's prejudice. Wait, my mind flashed to the strange email from the job site that landed me in this mess, and a strangled laugh bubbled up my throat. The job invite mail at Carrington. Let me guess, was that your doing too? Nate's lips quirked just a little. Guilty, he admitted, his thumb tracing the edge of my jaw. Not my finest ploy, but I had to. I needed to see you. I knew if I showed up randomly, you'd run for the hills. The intensity of his efforts hit me all at once. He returned just for me. He orchestrated the job invites and the Italy trip just for me. For me. I surged forward, my lips crashing into his. Nate grunted, his arms coming around me like steel bands, clutching me to him as he slanted his mouth over mine, deepening the kiss until I was lightheaded with it. I love you, I gasped when we broke apart, my forehead pressed to his. I love you so fucking much, Nate. Even when I hated you, even when I wanted to strangle you with your own stupidly expensive tie, Nate laughed, breathless and giddy, his fingers sinking into my hair. Thank God for that, he murmured, nipping at my bottom lip. Although, I would have deserved it, the strangling. I grinned so wide my cheeks ached. Maybe, I allowed, fisting my hands in his shirt. But lucky for you, I'm feeling generous. Nate's eyes darkened, his grip tightening. Oh yeah? And what's the price of your generosity? I leaned in closer, my lips brushing the shell of his ear. You, I whispered. Just you, Nate. Always. I'd regret it later, the lack of discussion of hashing out all the hurt that still hung between us, but right then, with Nate's lips on my skin and his hands branding me with the heat of his touch, I couldn't find it in me to care. With the dark shadow of our parents' unfortunate marriage gone, we had time now, all the time in the world, to talk, to fight, to figure out what this meant for us, for our future. Because we had one now, a future, together. And it felt like hope, like a promise, like coming home, where I won't ever have to feel alone. Conclusion. In the end, Nate and I had found our way to each other despite the odds. Robert almost had a heart attack when he found out. As expected, he tried to hold Nate down with the threat of ripping away his position and sending him abroad. Nate quickly laid it out to rest with the news of his current position as the largest shareholder. I helpfully called in the doctor Nate had prepared in advance. Robert had his quirks, but between both of us combined, he was the only living, breathing parent, so he's okay with our relationship now, I think. The end. Would you risk it all for forbidden love? Thanks for watching. Consider subscribing to become part of our Rainbow Force, and stay wholesome.